Oh golly, I sure hope there are no walls slightly taller than me preventing me from making progression. Oh, there are? And there's quite a few? Throughout Monster Hunter Wilds, there are a lot of locations where you might feel like you need to use the Seikret. But with these comes a lot of times where the Seikret ends up being an optional choice. I've seen a lot of the community complaining about Seikrets and how pushed on they are to the player. But in reality, there aren't that many locations that feel mandatory to use the Seikrets, and tend to just be optional side areas, though this is not always true, and we're going to be taking an exhaustive tour of all of them. We're going to start in Wyveria. Over here in Area 1 to Area 2 is this vine path. While it seems insignificant at first, you have to travel up a vine wall to get here by foot, or take a rather long winding side path on two different sides. The value of this can kind of be up to the player, as you can get to the other location fairly quickly, but it's still going to provide you some extra time. And right next to this vine path is a rather well hidden little path against this webbing cloth tarp thing. I've talked about this in another video. It's a really weird location. If you take this path from Area 3, it will bring you all the way to Area 6, right in front of a camp. While this path is not largely useful, it could come up in some very niche situations based on monster movement, though I see that being very unlikely given my experience. Regardless of that, it makes for quite the nice view to take a run across if you've never had the opportunity to use this. Immediately after that, though, is something that has a bit more value, and that is the Area 6 Secluded Ruins Camp. Originally, this served as a grand camp that monsters could not destroy, but with the changes to how monsters interact with camps through an update, this has largely become an obsolete camp and more serves as a cozy camping, but it is still a camp that is Seikret exclusive. Heading over to the other side of this floor in Area 6, we are at the southeast camp, and the Seikret can scale this waterfall, but directly next to it is a vine that the player can climb. So it's more of a fun little thing you can do with your Seikret than something necessarily super restrictive. On this path leading down to the third floor, there is a climbable wall, but it is just slightly too tall to climb on foot. If you take this path with Seikret, it will save a little time versus taking the path on the left, but it's nothing really critical to restrict the player. And let's just take a moment to appreciate how high the hunter can climb. It's kind of ridiculous. Now we're going from the vine path on Area 8 to Area 10. This vine path is rather substantial as it shortcuts you halfway across this level. That being said, there is a camp fairly close on each side, so this one won't be very impactful if you're willing to give up the campsites to do it. Speaking of campsites, we unfortunately have another Seikret exclusive camp, and well, quite cozy as the previous ones. There is a camp adjacent to this one, so it's not the end of the world, as it's fairly neutral in its location when taking into consideration the other camps nearby, and simply serves more as a safer location. Now we're near the basin of the Wyverian ruins, and the most impactful Seikret exclusive locations that I could find in this locale. These vine paths link areas 10, 13, and 14 all together. Quite a lot of skipping around can be achieved here if you do so. With the lack of camps, this is probably a location you're going to want to use Seikret. As you can see, me even running around the outside with Seikret takes quite a bit of time to accomplish. Now we're going to head over to the Windward Plains. This ended up being the most tame locale in terms of restrictions put on the player with Seikret. To me, this makes sense. It is the first locale the player visits. So I assume the devs wanted to make sure the player was as comfortable as possible with the world space before introducing more complexity in traversal. And right out the gates, we are greeted with these many fulgurite spines branching out in various directions, all going above the small areas of 7, 8, 1, and Kunafa Village itself. These will kind of get you around, but they're fairly minor impact as going underneath is relatively the same pace. This is mostly going to be nice if you want to avoid large monsters impeding you, but you won't really notice these outside of that. They're more for flavor than anything else. And yet again, we're greeted with another exclusive Seikret camp that is quite beautiful, as are the previous ones, in the Mineral Cave in Area 4. And here, it's mostly just pretty, as there is a campsite closer to the upper levels on the west side, if you want a more convenient camp for Area 5. Besides that, you're going to get a bunch of mining nodes if that is something you are looking for. So it could be valuable in one way, but not necessarily in the long game. Now, I did say the ones in the Windward Plains were fairly minimal, but this one's the most impactful of all of them. This large isolated cliff rock location offers a bunch of rare materials on top of it, and you can only access it by flying to it with the Seikret from way up above in Area 5. Or you can Yoshi your Seikret from the campsite nearby. Speaking of the campsite, there is a campsite here, slightly below, that you can access with a wedge beetle, thankfully. So you aren't missing out on this camp, but you are going to miss out on a night blossom spawn that can spawn here. So if you're in the need for resources, this one's going to feel like a bit of a sting for you non-Seikret users. Heading over to the Iceshard Cliffs, and right out of base camp, we're immediately greeted with a tucked away camp that many players might have missed. Given its proximity to the base camp, the distance traveled is not something you're going to feel the pressure of when you don't have a Seikret. But what are you missing out by not having a Seikret for this camp? A very beautiful view where you can see multiple locales that you have previously traveled to, including the Windward Plains, the Scarlet Forest, and the Oilwell Basin. It makes for a great sight. As well as this, there's also a curious shell crab that can spawn here, if that's something you're interested in. Though, given how many spawns there are for the curious shell crab, you can probably find one just as good or even better to farm from. This map, you're really going to feel the need to use a Seikret, and that starts with the Area 19 camp, the floating rock wall. This grants access to many areas throughout the Iceshard Cliff, including Area 11, 10, 8, and even 16, which is the location where Gore Magala and Arkfeld go to rest. And speaking of Area 16 for Gore, Magala, and Arkfeld, this area is completely gated off to the player if they do not have a Seikret. Both on the left side, which is gated by the floating rock wall camp, and the right side, which has two large Seikret-only traversal walls, which the player can't even attempt to walk up. So if you want to finish off Gore or Arkfeld, you might be sitting around a bit while they rest up and get nice and healthy, or hope you manage to stop them before they go there. Here is Area 8 to Area 10. It has minimal impact going from Area 8 to 10, but going from 10 to 8 requires much more time on foot. And here's another niche path, Area 10 to Area 5, that goes all the way down here, but pops you right out near the north campsite. So fairly questionable if you would even need to ever use this path. Right below base camp is another Seikret path, Area 7 to Area 17. There's a camp nearby, the Ancient Room Camp, so it's not too big of a deal. This one I consider the first major win for non-Seikret users. Area 17 to Area 2. You get to take this long, winding path all the way down with Seikret. But you can't just jump off if you really want, saving substantial amount of time. Though I guess if you want to go back up, yeah. And here we have Area 11 to Area 15. There's a camp nearby again, the Upper Corridor campsite. So nothing really much to say about this one as well. In the Scarlet Forest, we immediately are greeted with this weird fallen tree near the base camp. What makes this one even more odd is the tree is one way, so the Seikret can't even go through it freely as they want. And given its location, it doesn't really offer the player anything outside of a nice view. It's quite odd. The Scarlet Forest is no stranger to giving the Seikret advantage, and you'll definitely feel that if you head to the canopies of the Scarlet Forest. Up here are 2 separate camps the player cannot access without the Seikret. As well as all this place grants access to many areas throughout the Sacred Forest in a very convenient way. Areas 11, 3, 6, 12, 10, 9, and 2. And also another tree that you can go up with literally nothing up here except a few gather points, which ends up being exclusive to Seikret. So an exclusive area within an exclusive area. Thankfully, with all these canopies, you can still reach the Wyveria nests without the need of a Seikret. Over here, another secret camp that many players might not have seen. Near the various nests where you often see cuckoos at is a hidden waterfall camp in Area 16. Down here are a few collectibles and a very nice vista, but way out of the way for anywhere of import. Now we're at another vine cluster, and one that often gets ignored by the player due to how impactful it really is based on monster movement patterns. This vine cluster connects areas 17, 14, and 10 together, and there isn't too much going on in all these vine clusters due to the various normal paths the player can walk next to them, and the lack of really impactful monster movement patterns between these areas. Though there is a campsite nearby here, the Southwest campsite in Area 14, which could be used in some situations. Though right next to this is a very important path, and one most hunters have likely used, is this path going from Area 13 to 15, with all this various rubble out over the flowing rivers here. This provides a very convenient path for chasing water-dwelling monsters, as they tend to frequent this path when transitioning areas. And with this is also a important environmental trap that could easily be missed without the Seikret, unless you're fast enough to fast travel from the Windward camp or the Area 14 camp nearby. They were gracious enough to give us a little spot halfway through where we can dismount and kind of just take in the view. For our final destination, the Oilwell Basin. Here at the base camp, we are immediately greeted with a path that gives us access to Area 2 and 6. Though, given the proximity of the camps between 4 and 6, the dilapidated roadway campsite, there's not a huge impact unless you're really in a rush to reach Area 2. This next one I found kind of funny. It's in Area 1 to the base camp. It is a vine wall that is Seikret exclusive, but immediately next to it is a pit elevator, so no biggie, I guess. In the back here is another one that's almost not even worth mentioning, as it's only used in the story once. There's no real reason to ever go over here, and there's not even really a great view to see either. So the only thing this is doing is stopping you from beating the story without a Seikret. Here's another one that is mostly just for flavor. The piping leading from Area 2 to Area 7. But adjacent to this is a walking path. Now, right next to this Seikret path is another path many players may have missed, linking up Area 7 and Area 9. If you're in a hurry, this can be very useful, though if you do a bit more research into the location, there are many camps near Area 9 and 7, and even a spot you can drop down from in Area 8 to Area 3. This next one gives you a huge cut across the entire third floor. It's area 12 to area 15, and there are camps on both sides of this. So not something you'll really notice without the Seikret, but you will be missing out on a very pretty cave. In fact, let's take a little jaunt through it real quick. And speaking of caves, the mining cave campsite in Area 14 is completely locked away from the player if they do not use a Seikret. And with this, that includes the Street Fighter collaboration quest, which will require a Seikret in order to beat it, as you cannot get up here to talk to him to continue the quest without a Seikret. The location for this camp is quite good as well, as it is right next to two high-traffic large monster locations. It's also just very pretty to look at. Now, last but certainly not least is New Udra's lair, which you cannot get to without a Seikret. Now, unlike Gormagala and Arkveld's location in the Iceshard Cliffs where they go to rest, they can be less problematic to stop than New Udra. New Udra tends to move very quickly and cannot be flashed at all, making it difficult to impede it before it takes off to its lair. Not only that, it seems to nap substantially longer than other monsters due to it needing to do the animation to crawl into its little hole to nap. So you could end up seeing the New Udra gone for a very long time on your quest if you choose not to use the Seikret at all. And that is an exhaustive list of every location that only the Seikret can traverse. What are my overall thoughts on this? While you do require the Seikret to beat the story, the overall impact is not as heavy as it may have seemed, as most of these locations simply end up serving as a faster means to travel and not necessarily areas completely locked off from the player. Well, outside of those two layers we mentioned. So maybe you might want to give No Seikret hunts a chance and see how much it really impacts your time for clearing the quests. And that will do it for another Monster Hunter Wilds video. Up here, another video. Down here, another video. Over here, subscribe. Thank you to my members. And thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Bye.